Happy holidays to all of you. It's good to see you. My goodness, another packed room, and it is really good to see you. This is the first day of Hanukkah, and so we remember our Jewish friends and especially pay tribute to those who are members of our club today, and thank you for your presence among us. Jan Paflas is going to offer the invocation, and for the invocation, a very special time for us because all of us knew Mick McCollum so well. He was our most immediate past executive director, beloved by all, a true person who was dedicated to Quest Club and all that it stands for. And so, Jan, if you would come forward to offer that memoriam.
Well, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to give a tribute to my longtime friend and respected member, past president, and executive director of Quest Club, Mick McCollum. Michael Eugene McCollum, born in 1943, died this past May after a valiant but much too short battle with cancer. He was, as so many of you know, the hardest working, most positive, most generous, kind person one could know. He was a product of small-town Indiana, graduated from Ball State, earned a business degree from Indiana University. He was a pilot in the U.S. Army in Vietnam, where he flew Huey helicopters in a medevac unit. He saved many injured men, and he earned a Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the highest honors awarded for heroism and extraordinary achievement by the United States of America. I happened to be with him and his family at the Air and Space Museum near Washington, D.C. one day just before his daughter's wedding, looking at a Huey when he said quietly, "Well, we used to sit on metal cafeteria trays to add protection under our seats while we were flying over enemy areas." Mick married his wife, Sue, just before he went to the military. He said he didn't want anyone else to steal her away while he was gone. And after his service in Vietnam, he and his young family moved to Fort Wayne, where he started a company in his garage, which he built into automation engineering, the successful conveyor belt company which he ran for the next 40 years. One of my sons, John, was lucky enough to work for Mick for a couple of summers during college. He did various tasks, but one of his most important jobs was to pick up lunch, which Mick generously bought for all of his employees every Friday. Always civic-minded, Mick loved Fort Wayne, and he contributed to our city throughout his life. He was a longtime member of Business Forum. He sat on the board of the History Center. He was the president of the board of the Philharmonic. He held season tickets to the Tin Caps and loved going to their games. He helped start the Economic Development Alliance. He was on the Canterbury Foundation Board and the Canterbury School Board for several decades, where he donated hours and hours of time, actually weeks and months, if I'm being honest, as the general manager of construction at the school. No one knew more about the physical plant there than Mick McCollum. And as we know, he was a lover of Quest, donating a remarkable amount of time to being our executive director. Mick was organized. It's said by his family that Mick had the minutes of every meeting he had ever attended during his entire life filed neatly in his office. He had folders for everything, even the puns and the jokes that he sent to all of us Questers. And his papers. Two of the best of Mick's papers were The Mysteries of the Stradivarius Violin and The Lighter Side of Winston Churchill. He gave the Winston paper just before Christmas, I think it was in 2010, dressed in a top hat and a bow tie with a cigar. It's a pithy paper and full of witty quotes, including Winston's retort to his dinner partner, "Yes, Bessie, my dear, I am drunk. And you are ugly. But tomorrow I'll be sober." Or the story of the unveiling of a sculpture of Churchill in Virginia, in the United States, when a very attractive Southern woman came up to him and gushed out, "Mr. Churchill, I got up at dawn and drove 100 miles to see the unveiling of your bust." You know. Well, Churchill replied, "Madam, I'd be happy to reciprocate." Mick's paper is available online for you to read. It's lots of fun. Later in life, Mick became a baby cuddler at Lutheran Hospital's neonatal intensive care unit. He went every week, and he held any tiny baby who needed holding. In his eulogy, his daughter Katie said that it's warmly satisfying to think that there are children running around Fort Wayne that Mick had cuddled in the NICU. While Mick was involved in all sorts of community activities, he was primarily a family man. Married happily to Sue for 56 years, father of 4 wonderful children, Lisa, Brad, Jennifer, and Katie, and grampy to 11 loving grandchildren, Mick cherished his family above all else. I'm particularly grateful that Mick and Sue's oldest daughter, Lisa, is my wonderful daughter-in-law. She married Nick, another son. Mick lived in a very marvelous life. We remember him as our treasured friend, and we'll miss him very much. Thank you.
Mick and I, at the last count, go back 50 years. So we were very close, and apart from sharing the same nickname, Mick, we had many, many things in common. Some of these Jan has alluded to, and I'll breeze through them. But we were, first of all, we did proudly serve our military in the Vietnam era. Mick had a much more hazardous role than mine. I was a desk jockey. He was a chopper pilot. But we were entrepreneurs. We had our own businesses, which were very demanding. And as a result of that, we tried, but we still tried to find time to give to our community, which was one of his hallmarks. We were actively involved in civic roles in Fort Wayne, particularly in the economic development area, following the exodus of International Harvester and Lincoln, which many of us remember those days. And they were rough years, to say the least. I was chairman of the Chamber of Commerce for a while. Mick was president, as Jan has mentioned, of the Alliance, and which was a city-county chamber consortium. We were active members in 2 dynamic clubs, Business Forum and Quest Club. We were both very active in other community areas, cultural areas, and the Philharmonic and in my case, the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. So we were always comparing notes. But perhaps most importantly was Mick's involvement with Canterbury School. And we were involved with it from the start. Mick was indispensable to that school, as Jan has already touched on it. But it was the Canterbury School experience that I think forged what I would call a friendship into a real kinship. Mick and I were conservative politically, so we admired leaders such as Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, and especially Winston Churchill. Mick and I finally ended up, after our kids had left the nest, we ended up being neighbors. So I knew Mick very well, and I've been trying to think of how to describe what made Mick so special. The words like capability, versatility, humility came to mind. But none seemed quite adequate until I finally decided, from my perspective, Mick was the ultimate quintessential go-to guy. As a member of the Alliance, he could do a slick PowerPoint presentation to a prospective investor or business, pitching Fort Wayne as a place to do business. And the next day, he'd go down and fix the boiler at in the basement of the Canterbury schools so the kids would have a warm school on a wintry morning. When some folks came to me at one point and asked if I'd consider political service, running for public office, I flirted with the idea for a few minutes and asked, I thought of myself, if I were to do this, I would need somebody at my right hand. And the first name that came to my mind was Mick McCollum. This guy could do just about anything and was willing to do it as long as it was legal and ethical. He proved to be the go-to guy for Quest Club, as Jan has just mentioned, when we needed somebody after Lockwood Marine's untimely and abrupt departure. Just two Quest anecdotes, and I'll close. First was Mick's portrayal. Jan has set it up beautifully, of Winston Churchill. He came in character right down to the cigar, and I thought he had a glass of scotch in his hand as well. He was wonderful, and the retort I remember, he was making some pitch, and he was in the room with John Jacob Astor and Lady Nancy Astor, and he made some remark that apparently upset Nancy Astor, and she said, "Winston, if I were your wife, I would put poison in your coffee." To which he said, "Madam, if I were your husband, I'd drink it." Finally, a little known and appreciated fact about Mick McCollum, and some of you will relate to this. He could tie the perfect bow tie. He wore bow ties a lot. And a number of years ago, Quest, when they would have their annual Quest parties, they were really dress-up affairs. A lot of us would come in our finest, tuxes in the case of men. And I can remember many times struggling to get my bow tie tied. And as the hours ticked off, I finally would reach the phone and call Mick and say, "Help me with this. I'll stand here and just talk me through it." So he'd talk me through it. He'd say, "Well, we'll take a look at it when you get to the Fort Wayne Country Club." And as I walked through the door, I'd look for Mick, and he would eye me, and I could see his eyes were rolling. And so he said, "Come with me." And he would take me into the men's room, strip off the tie, and retie the tie. So it was perfect. So I'll tell you that there are many reasons I'm going to miss Mick McCollum, but that certainly is high on the list. Such a wonderfully gifted man, a real patriot, a model citizen of our community, a consummate family man, great friend of many, with his warm and welcoming smile, his big friendly laugh, and as all of us Questers know. So may God bless you, Mick, and may you rest in peace.
I'm Sue McCullum, and I want to thank you for this wonderful honor of Mick. I want to thank Jan and Mick, and I want to thank all of you that gave him the opportunity to be your executive director. He loved this job, and he also appreciated all of you, especially to keep you informed of the latest pun. We love you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Jan again. And Jan Paflas holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in mathematics from Indiana University, Bloomington. She worked for Eli Lilly in computer programming and systems analysis. She taught mathematics, was a development director and administrator at Canterbury School. Jan was also a founder and board president for Canterbury School. She served on the board and finance committee of SCAN, and she has been an active member of the Allen County Courthouse Preservation Trust, Stillwater Hospice, and we are very grateful for this, Quest. She enjoys traveling, the outdoors, reading, music, and a lake cottage. She says she has, well, she says, but this is what we saw actually. She has 4 adult children and 13 grandchildren, and in her free time is filled with their graduations, music, and sports activities. This is Jan's 6th paper, and Jan, we're very much looking forward to it.
My paper topic is the changing roles of philanthropy. So thank you for the privilege of researching this topic. And as always, the topic revealed itself sort of slowly as the person reads articles and books and searches the internet. And I interviewed experts in the field and ponder about it all. With this topic, it occurred to me that most of the people in this room have experience with philanthropy, many on the asking end of gifts, and all of us on the giving end. While that's somewhat unnerving, I will proceed with abandon. So philanthropy, from the Greek roots philos and anthropos, philanthropy may be translated as loving people. The English word refers to general goodwill toward one's fellows. We mean specifically, in these current days, giving money, giving time, giving goods to help make life better for other people. We have always valued sharing with others who need our help. In the Old Testament, people were expected to tithe for the use of the temple and to support the needy. The first recording of tithing is in Genesis 14:20, when Abraham gave tithe of 1/10 of his produce. These tithes were really taxes. They were akin to taxes, for they certainly weren't optional, they were mandatory. In Islam, one of the basic pillars is zakat, is a religious duty for all Muslims of a basic level of wealth to help those who are in need. All people, from the Chinese to our Native Americans, all people have long, rich histories of sharing their gifts. Philanthropy has always had a valued place in human society. It's a broad topic, and we could talk about it from many points of view. I was asked to consider the changing roles of it in this paper. Certainly, philanthropy is ever-changing and developing over the years. First, I'm going to take a bird's eye view so that we can think about 3 main traditions of philanthropy in the United States over our history. Respected students of the topic, Elizabeth Lynn and Susan Wisely have reported these things. To begin with, the most ancient form of philanthropy is relief, which we often call charity. Energized by a spirit of compassion, relief is an effort to alleviate human suffering. The basis of relief is that we're all related to one another as part of God's creation, and we therefore must share God's gifts. From the very beginning of our country in 1630, when John Winthrop delivered a sermon called A Model of Christian Charity to his Puritan brothers, he said, and I quote, "It appears plainly that no man is made more honorable than any other, or more wealthy out of any particular and singular respect for himself, but for the glory of our Creator and the common good of man." Close quote. We are indeed commanded in all religious traditions to love our neighbors as ourselves. This form of giving has been and continues to be important from Winthrop's day until the present. We give food to a food pantry. A foundation designates money for the needy. We help the Red Cross with a disaster. We are participating in relief. There are many strengths to relief. We express our care for others. We feel with others. We respond to their immediate need. We help them when we are able. We're not trying to do a thing to influence those who cannot help themselves. We're certainly not trying to shape their lives or cause them to live differently, just to help alleviate their pain. But this tradition of relief can, at its worst, waste resources by failing to address the root cause of the suffering. It asks us to respond to pressing, immediate needs rather than try to change the conditions that caused them. And it does absolutely nothing to prevent the same things from happening again and again. We passively accept the order of things, that some will always be rich and powerful, while others are low and subjected to poverty and need. Relief is resigned to the inevitability of social inequality. The poor you will always have with you, that from Deuteronomy. So the second tradition, called philanthropy as improvement, has developed, at least partly, from the perceived constant need of repeated relief giving. Philanthropy of improvement is from the old Chinese proverb, teach a man to fish and feed him for a lifetime mentality. This style of giving seeks to maximize human potential. During the first half of the 1800s, philanthropists such as Andrew Carnegie and others questioned giving only for relief, and they strived instead to provide opportunities for people to better themselves. For example, Carnegie, who is really one of the richest men in the history of the United States in their time or in ours, gave away 90% of his wealth in his lifetime to a variety of causes intended to encourage people to improve themselves. Among his many gifts, he famously gave monies to establish over 1,600 libraries in towns and universities. Indiana received Carnegie grants to establish 164 libraries, the most of any state. The first to open in Indiana was surprising to me, the Goshen Carnegie Library, where I personally spent a good number of Saturday afternoons. Carnegie, who died just over 100 years ago, championed giving to help those who would help themselves by providing, quote, ladders on which the aspiring can rise. Free libraries, parks to improve the body and mind, works of art to give pleasure and improve the public taste. This is his words. And public institutions of various kinds, which will improve the general condition of the people. In this manner, returning surplus wealth to the mass of their fellows in forms best calculated to do them lasting good. Carnegie wrote those words in a book called The Gospel of Wealth. According to Carnegie and his contemporaries, those who have initiative and talent will take advantage of the ladders set before them, and the population will benefit. So giving to a scholarship fund, for example, endowing the educational institution of your choice, sponsoring the arts, supporting cultural organizations. All of those are examples of philanthropy as improvement that we value today. However, the tradition of improvement, as well as that of relief, has its flaws, and philanthropists became more aware of the problems of poverty, inequality, and race that beset many, limiting access to the very ladders aimed at helping them. The idea of taking advantage of an opportunity was compromised if entire groups of the population were blocked for social, economic, and even legal reasons for taking advantage of opportunities. So by 1960s, not too long ago, several large foundations, including the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and the Carnegie, became conscious of the need for social reform if they were to be most effective. So that's another change. Called philanthropy of reform, this new strategy began to try to change societal foundations of inequality in order to make their grants as effective as possible. Philanthropy of reform strives to actually change society. To this end, the MacArthur Foundation's slogan became a catalyst for change. According to ideas of philanthropy of reform, many large givers take a proactive and even directive role, trying to identify societal problems and solve them. With large gifts of money, they attempt to influence and reform society. In the 1960s, the Ford Foundation, which was then the largest in the world, began to direct more of its gifts to support African American causes. In the mid-60s, with the Civil Rights Act newly on the books, foundations, especially the Ford Foundation, dedicated increased support to civil rights organizations such as the National Urban League, the NAACP, various diverse arts organizations, historic black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and African American studies departments. Not surprisingly, Ford's support of the civil rights group, even the moderate civil rights group that they chose, brought a large backlash from many. And there was even a boycott of Ford cars for a while. After Nixon's inauguration in 1969, Congress opened hearings to investigate foundations in the United States. Clearly, philanthropy of reform can be quite effective. Very large donors have become, to some extent, a sort of shadow government, accomplishing things that no one else can or will. And these three types of philanthropy that I've just mentioned, philanthropy of relief, that of improvement, and that of reform, certainly not mutually exclusive, but in general, both foundations and private givers are moving in the direction of the reformers. So now, pulling in from that overview for a more micro view of philanthropy, here are some specific examples of changes. I spoke with several generous and helpful fundraising professionals, including those working in education, community funding, the arts, and healthcare. Some examples of trends that have become apparent as I became apparent as I was interviewing them, and they do tend to support the general changes that I discussed above. Americans are the most philanthropic people in the world, and the study of philanthropy has become very scientific and full of data. The Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at IUPUI in Indianapolis is globally recognized as the first and best of its kind. Its highly respected faculty and staff train students to become leaders in the world of fundraising, and it collects extensive data about giving in the United States. So one can get a bachelor's degree, a master's, even a PhD in philanthropy at the Lilly Family School. Their research is available to use, and many nonprofits and interested funding professionals are welcome to take advantage of the helpful resource that they have. As I was writing this paper, I found a number of trends in philanthropy in the United States, and I chose a couple to talk about. So first, one big change is from generation to generation in giving. It seems there is a significant change in the United States from older to younger donors. While older donors give more total dollars than younger ones, they tend to give to institutions that they have had a long-term affiliation with and that they have trusted over years. And they expect that these institutions will use their gifts appropriately, and they trust that they will. While younger donors tend to direct their gifts to specific causes, so says Lilly, and issues that they're concerned about and have become involved with. A good place that this change can be seen is in religious giving. While more dollars are given to religious organizations in the US than any other, change has happened. According to Gallup, In 1937, 73%, approximately, 73% of the U.S. population reported belonging to a church, a synagogue, or a mosque. And the number hovered in the 60 to 70% range for the next 6 decades. But at the turn of the century, it began to decline. In the early 2020s, the number had dropped to 47%. It's mostly due to societal changes, but was exacerbated by COVID-19, which required churches to be closed and attendance to be remote. And since that pandemic, church attendance among young and middle-aged people has barely recovered, while attendance among older Americans has. According to the ABC News, 60% of people over 65 attend church regularly, while only 28% of 18 to 30-year-olds do. The percentage of Americans who give to their churches consistently mirrors exactly church attendance. While both are dropping in the United States, certainly older people continue to support church giving, while fewer younger people do. The trend presumably has a large impact on churches' relief giving in communities. According to the executive director of development at Northwestern University, older givers who do give to trusted institutions such as their church also support their alma mater, as well as other well-known traditional organizations such as, say, the American Heart Association or the Salvation Army. Younger givers may give to those organizations, particularly the educational ones, but they're much more skeptical, and they want to direct their gifts for a specific use. They question, how will they use my dollars? Do I agree with how you will use them? They often use GuideStar, an online site that reports data about charities and rates them according to their percentage of overhead and their degree of transparency. So donors can be certain that the money goes where they intend it to go. Younger donors support issues over organizations, says the Bank of America and the Lilly Family School. Not surprisingly, young people, especially affluent young people, list education and climate change as #1 issues that they support. Older Americans choose religious causes and education as the top 2 money recipients. The degree that younger donors want personal connections with their nonprofits and reports from them about how they've used their gifts is much higher. And younger donors must be especially stewarded. Secondly, another change over the past few years is from wealth disparity. There's been a much larger gap in income and wealth in the United States in the last 3 or 4 decades. Pew Research reports that from 1983 to 2016, the aggregate wealth belonging to upper income families jumped from 60 to nearly 80%. Or looking at it another way, the United States wealth distribution in 2023, just this last year, found that 69%, well over 2/3 of the total wealth in this country, was owned by the top 10%, while the bottom 50%, half of all earners, had 2.5% of the wealth. In philanthropy, this has corresponded to a decrease in the percentage of households who donate money. It's under 50% for the first time in a long time. While middle and lower income households are giving fewer gifts, affluent givers have increased the number of very large gifts, many over 6 figures. These large gifts are certainly directed to the donor's choice and not to just any institution, as opposed to general gifts for relief. Examples of large, specifically directed gifts are these 2 interesting ones. Bertie Buffett, who's I think a sister or or a niece of Warren, recently wrote a check for $101 million to endow the Buffett Institute for Global Affairs, her chosen charity, at Northwestern University. Or this one, Michael Bloomberg, who gave $1.8 billion to Johns Hopkins University for the use of undergraduate aid to try to make the university need blind. I hardly need to mention billionaire Mackenzie Scott, previously married to Jeff Bezos, who has donated since 2020, 4 years, over $14 billion to some 1,600 specific charities, organizations, including historically black colleges, organizations led by women, food banks, and more, all very specific. Large gifts are getting bigger and more frequent, and they're almost always directed by the donor to accomplish some definite purpose. Another recent change is in taxes. Changes in the federal tax law contribute to decrease in smaller gifts as well. Nearly 30% of the population used to itemize their federal income tax returns and receive deductions for their gifts. Now the number is down to less than 10%. The Tax Cut Act in 2017 approximately doubled the standard deduction and eliminated most itemized deductions. So now 90% of middle-income families simply take the standard deduction and lose the advantage of saving on their taxes that they used to get by making gifts. Uncle Sam is not helping fund nonprofits as he once did. The change in estate tax laws also contributed to decrease in the number of gifts. If someone dies in 2023, the first $13 million of their estate is exempt from taxes. Few estates are large enough to qualify for this encouragement to give. The relationships between tax credits and giving is complicated, and data for the years following the tax cuts of 2017 continues to be studied. People donate for many reasons, perhaps not to save tax dollars primarily, but it does make a difference, especially among mid-level households. Another important change in philanthropic circles is the increase in the ability of women to give. In addition to the fact that women often outlive their male partners and have had the responsibility of directing the family wealth on their own end of life, women have gained earning power and control of wealth. Pew Research Center finds that women account for about 60% of students in college and increasingly outpace men in graduation rates. Women control about 1/3 of global wealth. They have become more confident in making decisions about where their gifts should go. Many more women want to be a part of the conversation about whether the family gives and to whom the money should go. Women are surprisingly twice as likely to say that giving is the best thing about having wealth. In particular, affluent women have become a real force for change in philanthropy. The Bank of America 2023 report on philanthropy called Charitable Giving by Affluent Households reports that about half of gift decisions are made jointly by spouses, and that 85% of all gifts given by affluent households are led or influenced strongly by women. While volunteerism is up among both men and women in the United States, women volunteer more than men, and because they volunteer more, they become more involved with various issues. Issues for women donors often include education, women's and girls' organizations, reproductive rights, women's health, and prevention of violence to women. Women traditionally want to see their dollars at work, either by volunteering or investigating recipients. So men and women are both active in giving, and women often are reported to be particularly careful and thoughtful in how they decide who should receive their gifts. In recent years especially, it behooves nonprofits to include both men and women among their prospects, and to be sure to thank men and women by name for their gifts. Another important change in philanthropy is the increased requirement for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Over the past decades, DEI has become more and more important in both business and nonprofit organizations, but particularly after the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent rise of Black Lives Matter movement, it has had a large impact on giving. Donors, particularly younger, wealthier donors, often ask to see a statement such as this one from Purdue University, Fort Wayne. This is from right here in town. Quote, Purdue Fort Wayne does not condone and will not tolerate discrimination or harassment against any individual on the basis of race, religion, color, sex, age, national origin or ancestry, genetic information, disability, status as a veteran, marital status, parental status, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, close quote. Pretty surprising to me. According to Follinger Foundation interim director, who is just now retired, I think, David Bennett, the increased requirement for a commitment to DEI is strong locally and has not subsided in the past years, but has continued to grow. Large foundations, such as those in Fort Wayne, as well as individual donors, want to be certain that social justice standards are held high for any organization to receive funds from them. Community foundations such as Follinger care strongly about issues of social justice. An important goal is to support nonprofit organizations who try to help their clients grow from dependence to independence to interdependence in their relationships. Finally, there is no ignoring changes because of technology. Almost all aspects of our lives have been changed by technology, and philanthropy is no exception. A leading fundraiser at the University of Wisconsin at Madison and formerly at healthcare giant Amida in Chicago reports that technology has been most helpful in identifying new donors, new givers, in conducting annual funds, in keeping in touch with givers, and in offering online giving to donors. Ease in giving online with a simple click instead of sending a check is among the most helpful changes that technology has made for nonprofits. One report of church support, these are several churches, told of an increase of 20 to 40% when churches make online giving easy for their members, especially their younger members. It feels much less difficult to have an automatic charge to your bank or to your credit card, apparently, than to put a $20 bill, let alone a $50, in the offering plate. Examples of crowdfunding also abound. Many younger, middle-aged people consider crowdfunding to be the only way they make contributions. One development officer that I spoke with said that we haven't taught our young people to be charitable except by participating in online giving opportunities. When many of us were children, our parents gave us a coin to put in the offering plate at Sunday school, and we learned about giving. Now many of us give automatic monthly gifts to causes that we believe in, such as public television or radio or animal or child welfare organizations. Personal letters and phone calls, as well as face-to-face visits, are still critical, both to solicit gifts particularly and to thank donors, but the long solicitation letters that we have used for so long and we get so many of are less effective than in the past. Fewer of us read them, perhaps because of our technologically shortened attention span. Giving in the United States is a cornerstone to our society's well-being. It can be said that philanthropy is a long-standing, distinctly American cultural characteristic, and statistics show us, as I say, that the United States is the most generous country in the world. Philanthropy has been a major source of support for religion, healthcare, education, and the arts. Social movements such as abolitionism, women's rights, civil rights, and environmentalism have benefited from voluntary giving. Philanthropy has built the United States higher education sector and the U.S. research sector into the finest in the world. Even at a time when there is concern about public confidence in our institutions and upcoming economic trends, Americans continue to have a broadly favorable feeling toward the positive effects of giving. Let's hope that positive feeling is one that never changes. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jan.